and recognition that is entirely undeserved. And this is worrying for what it suggests about the future of fact and truth in our current society. So there is first and foremost the 2009 book, Scourge of the Rangers. And this is the primary and best packaged manifestation of the conspiracy theory. As Carol indicated, it's actually a very problematic target because it is deliberately and declaredly a work of historical fiction. And as such, it protects itself from many of our criticisms. Most of our criticisms are sort of in the nature of the practice of history as a sober, scholarly discipline. But this novel does contain very clear assertions that it is using the techniques of historical fiction to tell a true story. And certainly this is the way it was positioned in the press. The authors claim to be pursuing a hidden and suppressed history, employing fictional narrative as a convenient or persuasive medium. And this medium, they say, was necessary to fill the gaps in information caused by the government's failure to release secret documents. Now, these sort of mixed messages are interesting because in the United States, for example, false history is protected as a freedom of speech under the Bill of Rights. However, there have been successful cases in state courts in the US brought against publishers who fraudulently advertise fiction as fact. And this is considered or can be considered a type of commercial fraud or false advertising. Now, there's no space to explore this here, but it would be interesting to know how this particular book would stand up to such procedures, given the sort of publicity that surrounded the book in which it was announced to be factual. The main point here is that these claims, the claims that the book is a quest for an historical truth that has been blocked by powerful vested interests, is just errant and self-serving nonsense. The novel is entirely fantasised. It bears absolutely no relationship to anything that is known or provable, and there are not even any reasonable grounds for suspecting that the story is in any way accurate or even close to accurate. I'm going to put that rather forcefully. So that was the first means, is the book. The second means, as Carol mentioned, was the peculiar means of having the New South Wales Legislative Council use Standing Order number 53 to demand the release of supposedly state-censored documents which were going to prove this conspiracy. This attracted enormous and long-running publicity, particularly up in the New England where I'm from. It ran quite uncontested for a very, very long period of time. And this did a lot to cement the conspiracy theory in the popular imagination. And it also, no doubt, advanced sales of the book. Nothing was done by politicians or the media to verify the claims made in this book. And I'm going to return to that point just in a moment. Another means used to propagate and preserve the conspiracy was more typical of the age in which we live, and that is the medium of a website. It's not a particularly good website, but if you type in Captain Thunderbolt into a Google search, this particular website appears third on the list. Now, thankfully, the first on the list goes to the very reputable piece in the Australian Dictionary of Biography. But in between the two, there is, of course, the Wikipedia entry. And that itself has become something of a battleground for the conflicting versions of Thunderbolt. And you can imagine what it's like. Both sides are seeking to constantly delete and override each other's entries. And this is something that Carol's been party to. She sort of looked into it, so she might get to talk about that later. The internet epitomises, and it's very much a primary cause of, I think, a modern crisis in truth. It has accelerated the democratisation of history, but it's also magnified its perils and pitfalls. The internet is the easiest, fastest and cheapest publication tool the world has ever known, and it allows false information to spread more widely and more quickly than was ever possible at any time in our history. It allows false information to spread free of the geographic, financial or institutional restraints which might once have controlled the production and impact of knowledge. So in revolutionising our access to information, it has also presented us with a cacophony of bullshit. Okay, so the final means of promoting and defending the conspiracy theory has involved the writing of letters, both personal letters and emails to Carol and myself, and there have been hundreds. But also levels to our colleagues, to high-level administrators at the University of New England, letters to the regional press, which are particularly galling because these are the sorts of things that are hard to left unanswered. Everything else we've largely ignored. They bombarded the peer-reviewed journal in which our work appeared. They continue to address members of parliament, civil servants, and anyone who they apparently believe has the authority to promote their case or to denigrate ours. Through this medium, they doggedly maintain that there remains a grievous conspiracy to suppress the true story of Captain Thunderbolt. As Carol said, they hold up the rejection of the parliamentary motion as ongoing proof of a conspiracy. And they maintain that this has caused some sort of constitutional crisis where politicians are caught between the demands of their constituents on the one hand and the pressure to maintain the integrity of the state on the other. In actual fact, the issue has simply come and gone, and we think that the politicians who briefly humoured this idea have probably now realised that there was nothing in it. Moreover, they actually claim that we are now party to this conspiracy, that we are using the mantle of academic respectability to subvert the quest for truth, to chook-feed government misinformation to an unsuspecting public. And so we are thus aiding the process of keeping Australians under what one of them called an insidious state of neo-serfdom. I'm not entirely sure what that is. They continue to hammer away at a number of points that they regard as decisive, that the identification of the body was circumstantial, that the bush ranger was sighted a few days after his death, and that US census records show him as residing in California in the late 19th century. They throw up a number of other smaller points that are somewhat peripheral, small matters that they believe contradict or complicate our bigger picture. But almost everything they say is demonstrably untrue, or is at best wildly speculative. And I think the problem we're facing here essentially is that these conspiracy theorists hold themselves up to be the arbiters of truth, irrespective of what evidence we present them, irrespective of what can be proven or disproven. Basically, we're all wrong because they know better. And ensuing from this and binding their whole offensive together is the constant refrain that we are bad historians. We have brought ourselves, our institution and the whole profession into disrepute. We haven't done our research. We have based our findings on hearsay rather than archives. And we have tailored our work to meet a preconceived and politicised outcome. There's also been some sort of insinuations that we forged documents and fabricated references. And all of this has been levelled against us without any hint of irony or self-reflection. And also with brazen hypocrisy, they claim that we have acted aggressively and offensively and that we've insulted their personal and professional integrity. So these have been the four main means of propagating this conspiracy: a self-published novel, the conning of a few politicians, a website, and a barrage of letters to anyone who they think might be interested. What's missing here, of course, is the subjection of any of these ideas to any sort of peer review or professional editing. So, in sum, I want to just reiterate that we believe that the conspiracy theory is based on an astonishingly poor grasp of the methods of historical research and practice. It includes the selective use of facts, the misrepresentation of facts, and indeed the invention of facts. And it does these to advance very misleading and preposterous assertions. And its propagation of this, in light of our attacks on it, have involved a number of techniques. 2 minutes. Their techniques include the misrepresentation of other people's arguments, the avoidance of key truths via the complication of simple facts, false claims of scholarly credibility, appeals to the broader public via the media, bullying and badgering of critics, and accusations against us of incompetence and rudeness. Now, broadly speaking, these are the techniques that are common to pseudo-history, including its most abusive form, which is negationism, or as in history denial, Holocaust denial. Pseudo-history thrives on distortion and deception, if not delusion, and its proponents tend to exhibit common personality traits, including stubbornness, paranoia, and grandiosity. Now, I'm not suggesting that we are dealing with anything here so odious as Holocaust denial. The Thunderbolt conspiracy is obviously not unspeakably offensive to victims and descendants of past atrocities, nor is it potentially dangerous in assisting the revival of political extremism. And the other point, of course, is that Holocaust denial has become eerily sophisticated these days in the way in which it mimics real history. The Thunderbolt conspiracy, in contrast, is marked by its ineptitude and extreme implausibility. In fact, it's probably more reflective of the so-called Dunning-Kruger effect, which is a cognitive bias in which individuals maintain an illusory sense of self-superiority, causing them to be completely oblivious to their own ineptitude and mistakes and wholly unable to accept the skill and expertise of others. This would explain some of the most bizarre, illogical, contradictory and impertinent reasoning and practices that I have ever encountered in 20 years as an historian. Now, thankfully in Australia we don't have the sort of cultural crises that might require us to criminalise the production of history, of the sort that has in numerous European countries, particularly France, resulted in memory laws. And even if we did, I mean, the Thunderbolt conspiracy could hardly be seen to be requiring legislative or judicial intervention. I mean, that would give it a credibility that it doesn't deserve. But just finally, it does have lessons and perhaps reveals something unsettling about the state of truth in our contemporary world. The Thunderbolt conspiracy, that should be entertained as plausible by anyone, is truly shocking, but I think in this case the culpability lies with the con artist rather than the conned. Of those who are conned, I think it's the media and the politicians who must take some share of the responsibility. Their gullible consumption of this nonsense speaks very badly of their willingness to promote and pursue populist rubbish at the expense of truth. Now, we're dealing here with a very minor and inconsequential aspect of our old colonial past, but there are today greater and more serious matters facing us where myth and misinformation are allowed to cloud our decision-making. We face a crisis of truth in our society. As I said, it's epitomised by the internet where, fact and fantasy are separated by one click of the button. But there's also a cultural angst, I think, where we are unable to be assured, for example, of whether or not human activity is causing climate change or whether we are going to war on false pretences, because we just can't trust that our leaders are not prepared to embrace this sort of stuff. We just don't know always what to believe and who to trust. And in a very minor but telling way, the Thunderbolt conspiracy reflects this crisis, both in its devious production of false information, but also in the readiness of people to endorse it and of others to believe it. And in this climate, I suggest that we should not so easily disrespect and disregard the expert opinion of those who are trained to detect bullshit. Thank you.